You will be disappointed if you miss this play. This is a commentary on The Lady in the Van. Alan Bennett's writing is nimble, ironic, cruel and humane. One of his saddest, funniest and most distinguished offerings for years. A wonderfully bittersweet comic diary of the years in which a lethally dotty and very smelly old bat parked her unroadworthy vehicle in Alan Bennett's Camden Garden. As Leo Fairchild, the brother of Margaret Fairchild, and the brother who had her put away in Banstead, which of course was an asylum, I feel I can now say what lies behind this story. And it is not a lie, and it is the truth. Mary Teresa Shepherd was not her real name, but known to Mr. Bennett as Miss Shepherd. She had changed it to Mary Teresa Shepherd, and possibly chose the name Mary after the mother of Jesus, and Teresa after Mother Teresa, whom she wished to emulate, and Shepherd after her desire to shepherd her family or lost sheep and encourage them to follow the ways of God. I have to confess, I put her away in Banstead, a mental asylum, as she proved to be rather eccentric, and she disturbed her family's home with warnings of sin, death and hell, and drove our poor mother into the attic for refuge. She was a religious fanatic, as some people say. However, she was not mad according to the law, as she escaped from Banstead, the mental asylum, and lived outside of care for a year and a day, living by her own means, and according to the law, she was not mentally ill or a danger to herself or others, and no doubt believed she should live by faith, as the scripture says, the just shall live by faith. Possibly Miss Shepherd mistook the example from Abraham for her new lifestyle, for Abraham was a tent dweller and moved from place to place, seeking the heavenly city to dwell in. She, being sensible, would be up to date, though, and become a van dweller, moving from place to place. Miss Shepherd probably thought her family were her enemies, because they had put her away, a reference to one's own enemies being they of their own household. However, she was involved in an accident where a young man was killed by a collision of a motorbike into her van, and as a result she fled from the law, having no insurance or tax on the van. She believed, having devoted her life to God, she had insurance for the van in heaven, though her conscience troubled her over the death of the young man who had been killed by running into her van. She managed to live in that van for many years. Eventually, she's taken in by a Good Samaritan, a reference to the religious acting not as they should. Mr. Bennett, of course, is the Good Samaritan, who does what the religious should have done. Mr. Bennett being, as far as the religious were concerned, the opposite to true religion, and he was not a Catholic. He took her in, doing what naturally came to him. However, Mr. Bennett, being openly and honest with himself, wrestles with his conscience as to whether or not this is a good deed or not, though the neighbours looked upon him, believing that he was a true saint for taking on this cantankerous old bat of a woman who was possibly driven by her desire to be a saintly person. Mr. Bennett, when approached by the professionals, protested he believed it only right to let her work out her own salvation and not to interfere with her lifestyle. Her flight involved a trip to France to visit a Catholic priest, where she confessed her sins, so to speak. But there was no clarity as to whether her sins, like motoring offences, should be forgiven. Maybe it might have been better had she spoken to Mr. Bennett, as the scripture suggests. She spends time with the Catholic nuns, which may have been in a convent seeking to become a nun. It would seem she wanted to devote her life to God. However, her God-given gift of music, playing the piano, was rejected by a Catholic superior nun, who suggested, rather than her gift being a sent gift from God, that it was devil-driven, and so she was forbidden to play the piano from that day forward. This may have been due to the sin of jealousy on part of the superior nun. Miss Shepherd felt this was her real gift and wanted to devote it to the glory of God, following scripture direction. but it was rejected due to the ignorance of a Catholic nun, which was a real grief to her. Seeking to live a good life, possibly with a mind to make amends for her past sense of guilt due to the death of that young man running into an untaxed vehicle, she finds refuge in Mr. Bennet's garden, who takes her in and her van, thinking it was only for a short while. Here she seeks to make a living by selling pencils, and then she felt she could become the Prime Minister, possibly to put the world right. However, after her communication with the Virgin Mary, the Virgin informs her that Margaret Thatcher was possibly doing a reasonable job, so she need not run for Parliament. I now realise that Margaret was not mad, just eccentric and not dangerous, but simply had learned misguided principles as to the way of salvation and the forgiveness of sins with God. And she could have learned her moral principles from Mr. Bennet. In this refuge of Mr. Bennet's front garden, Miss Bennet was pursued by Underwood, a ruthless man who was a villain and would help no one. This is an allusion to the devil, who blackmailed her for money, threatening to inform the police for her whereabouts and involvement in the accidental death of the young man with her van. But eventually, Underwood is robbed of his prey by her death in the van. Mary's wish, and her having the last laugh after 15 years, was to suggest to Mr. Bennet that a van stay in the garden and be left there, as it may become a place of pilgrimage for people to pay homage to her memory and so raise money for the Catholic nuns. But when questioned about the good that the nuns had done her, she retorts with a reference to doing good to those who were really your enemies. In this story, Miss Shepherd has become a legend, which was what she wanted in her way of thinking, and so has Mr. Bennet fulfilled her wish by making her van into a place of pilgrimage, or shall we say the story of the lady in the van, a real place in the minds of those who appreciate Miss Shepherd's eccentric life and religious devotion. A bit like some of our Titchfield Festival Theatre crew. She has had the last laugh by persuading Mr. Bennet to make Mary Teresa Shepherd into a saint or a legend by telling her story, not only in a book, but a play and now a film. Or is this story the mastermind of Miss Shepherd, pointing out that Mr. Bennet was really the true Good Samaritan, and was it her way of thanking him for his good deed done to her? If so, I think her message to us would be, go and do likewise. These are just my reflections on the play. Reverend Johnson is the appointed prison chaplain in the up-and-coming play Our Country's Good at St Margaret's in February 2016, and he has kindly put together for us a PDF file with hyperlinks containing all the biblical references that Alan Bennett made in his play, and he invites you to have a look at this. Please take a look, and he has set a quiz question for you. Please send your answer to me on this site.